I was going to ask you about your filmmaking, but listening to you talk, it seems like your first documentary film may have been birthed in the process of trying to move into a traditional academic position, and like you said, hustling
Well,
and whatnot. Is
it came a
that the
little
case?
earlier, actually. I mean, I kind of joke about filmmaking and say, well, I like to eat. I decided I should learn how to cook. Or it's like, I like to read. I decided I should learn how to write. And it's like, and I love movies. I'm just a big movie nerd. It's like, I always kind of thought, it'd be really fun to make a film someday. And I thought, well, documentary filmmaking really goes with being a historian. And it was just kind of in the back of my head someplace that it's like, yeah, someday I think I might try to make a film. And when I discovered the story of the Compton's cafeteria riot, which is what I made the film Screaming Queens about, with my good buddy and graduate school friend and colleague Victor Silverman, who's now a retired professor of history at Claremont College. Um, uh, when I found the story of the Compton's cafeteria riot, I thought, this is it. This is the thing that I want to make a movie about, because it's for the people who are listening to this who haven't seen it, it's about then completely unremembered and now increasingly better remembered story um, about trans women in San Francisco in the mid 1960s, 1966 to be precise, who fought back against police violence directed at trans people. August 1966 at an all-night cafeteria called Compton's Cafeteria, which happened 3 years before Stonewall. And I thought, yeah, like here's another story that's a San Francisco story that's centered on trans people. It's about kind of a collective politics. It's not like the usual story of transness, which tends to focus on an individual, and it tends to be ever since I was 5 years old, I always felt that I was an X, but really, everybody else thought I was a Y, but then I found something that could help me, and now I'm happy, right? So like that, I mean, that's the typical story, and like there's some truth in that. It's like in some sense, like that's my personal story. And yet, as a historian and as somebody who, I think of myself as someone on the political left, that it's like I was looking for like some story about how trans people had, not just sort of like passively experienced, violence and oppression. It's like surely like somebody had like done something somewhere sometime. And when I found this story, I thought, yeah, that's it. It's like I want to tell this story, and I don't just want to write an article in a history journal. It's like I want to tell this story in a really big public way that can become part of sort of the politics of memory. Like that it could become. It could be about making history in a way that most historians don't get to do. It's like, we write about history, it's like, but the idea of doing our historians' work in a way that like changes public discourse and knowledge about something, it's like, that's a little harder, a little heavier lift. And I just thought, like, it's like I want to tell this story so that people remember Compton's the way they remember Stonewall, which happened 3 years later. Or, it's like none of us were alive in, July 4th, 1776, but we know what happened on that date in the U.S. Revolution, right? That was when the Declaration of Independence was signed. We weren't there, but we know that, right? At some level. And so I wanted the story of the Compton's cafeteria riot to be something that was remembered by people who weren't there. And I thought, well, all right, film. Like film reaches a much bigger audience than a book. We decided to make a film using what was then like the most democratically accessible platform. This is before streaming media platforms. This is before everybody had an iPhone that you could, make movies on. It was like, no, it's like it needs to be a public television film, that will be broadcast nationally and will be available for, educational distribution. So that was the plan, and we did it. Like I said, I just feel so fortunate that I was able to work with my friend Victor on doing that. Like I said, he, old, close, dear friend. And right when I was applying for some grant money to start making this film, he called me up and said, like, hey, Susan, I'm on sabbatical this year, and I'm really thinking that, it's like, I'd like to kind of move more towards filmmaking. It's like, you want to write a movie together? And I said, as a matter of fact, I am right now in the process of applying for some grant money to make a documentary film. And he said, no, I want to make a feature film, not a doc. And I went, okay, tell you what, let's wait to see if I get this money. If I get the money, let's make the documentary film together. And if I don't, well, like, sure, let's write a screenplay on spec and like try to, break into the commercial media industry. So I got the money. We made the film. Victor was an invaluable part of bringing that film to the screen. I mean, like I said, I had done a lot of the original research about the story of the riot, but the film itself, the directing, the writing, the producing, researching archival footage rather than, archival, paper-based documents. Victor, it's like we split that work right down the middle. And so, I always, really want to, give him the credit that he is due for co-making that film. And so it was before. I mean, you had asked the question, was it kind of an extension of my work or preparatory to my work of like moving towards the academy? And it honestly wasn't at that time. It's like we started making the film in 98. That's when I got the first funding, and it got up on screen in 2005. So it was a 7-year long process to get that film up on the screen. And I really was not sure, what was going to come after that. It's like I was really debating whether or not I would just go like, you know what, I'm a filmmaker, and just start pursuing other projects. And there is a project that I started that I got a certain ways into that I then put on the shelf because I went back into the academy, or went into the academy as a professor for the first time. But having had some success with that film, Screaming Queens, like we won an Emmy Award for that, and like, damn, like that was, it's like I was not expecting that level of success. Let me just say that. But having made the film having been well received, having a long shelf life, and becoming something that now like is like increasingly part of what people remember about trans history, it opened up other doors for me. I've always kind of kept my hand in as a filmmaker. It's like I've done some like shorter experimental work. I've done a fair amount of producing and consulting, and I feel like I move increasingly in that direction. Like I've recently now, we talked about how being the Ruth Woodward Professor kind of launched my academic career at one level. I've just recently retired, as a full professor from the University of Arizona, where I was for many years. I have lined up a series of shorter term gigs. It's like I was at Yale last year on a fellowship, and currently I hold another short-term visiting professorship at Mills College in Oakland, California, where I'm the Barbara Lee Distinguished Chair in Women's Leadership for 2 years. But my goal in starting to move out of my regular faculty responsibilities, where it's like, I've got, administrative responsibilities and responsibilities for supervising students as well as for teaching. And then, because I live in San Francisco but was working in Tucson, a really, serious commute. I would commute weekly. And it's just like, You know, it's time to start moving towards another, another chapter of my career. And, would honestly really like to get back to more public facing work, where it's like writing for general audiences, doing a lot more media work, using media as a platform for education and scholarship, history at some level is about storytelling. So why not tell cool, interesting stories to the largest possible audiences in a sort of compelling and historically accurate way. And it's we'll see how all of that plays out. I'm putting my my hustler hat back on, and not just not just taking that paycheck for my my tenured professorship, but going no, it's I kind of I want to get out there and mix it up again and see if I can get some bigger scale media projects in the pipeline. And we'll see how that goes. It feels great at this time in my life and in my career to feel I've done some things. My finances seem as secure as they can be in the precarious times that we live in, but that it doesn't feel like I'm taking a huge risk to say no, I'll give up that tenured position because I'm really wanting to move in a little more creative directions right now. So yeah.
Well, I was going to ask about that. Seeing that you did just recently retire, so can you tell us?
I have
Can
a
you give us
book. I
any
have a book under
information about
contract
any?
right now that I'm trying to finish up. It's overdue, so I'm a little anxious, but trying to finish it. And it's a a big mass market sort of trade book, they call it, on trans history in North America. That's kind of my shtick. That's what I do these days. But from European colonization through the present, the big, thick, book that you know, that you say that you've read that you really haven't, right? One of those massive tomes. Working on that, teaching that book in my class that starts next week. I'm teaching a class called Trans Histories of North America, where I'm basically just using the class to goad me on to finishing that up by summer, I hope. And it is a little too soon, I think, to talk about some of the media projects I'm out there pitching, because you just never know if it's going to hit or if it's not. But I am actively working with some filmmakers and writers and producers on some projects. So we'll see if it happens. I'll let you know. If something comes up. I will say a project that I hope will happen. It's related to my previous film. So like I said, Screaming Queens, right at Compton's Cafeteria, about trans women resisting police oppression at a cafeteria at the corner of Turk and Taylor Streets in San Francisco's Tenderloin. And a number of years ago, I kind of asked myself the question of what's going on at that place now, And as it turns out, the building where Compton's Cafeteria was once located has been leased to one of the world's largest private for-profit prison companies. It's Geo Group. These are the same people who put kids in cages on the U.S. border with Mexico, and they contract with ICE, with the Immigration and Border Control, and with state and federal prisons to provide for-profit incarceration and detention, services. And at 111 Taylor Street, at the corner with Turk, it's this building where it's ground floor commercial property where the The restaurant had been, the rest of the building was a hotel called the Highland Hotel. And that part of the building is now the 111 Taylor Street facility, which is a transitional housing facility for people who are incarcerated and are transitioning out of incarceration back into the non-incarcerated population. So it's basically a glorified jail disguised as an apartment building. It's just like you come up to the outside of the building, it just says 111 Taylor Street Apartments, but it's like it's a controlled entry facility for people who are like on their sort of last stages of making that transition out of a prison sentence into civilian life again. And it just slays me that at this historic site of trans resistance to policing and incarceration, that it's occupied by a for-profit prison. So I have a project that I'm doing right now on, it's called At the Crossroads of Turk and Taylor, where I've been commissioned to write a piece of public-facing scholarship about how the legacy of trans resistance at Turk and Taylor is being mobilized in the present to help fuel social change activism, whether that's like, trans lives and black lives mattering in a poor neighborhood, or whether it's about gentrification and displacement in a city that until the pandemic was like tech central. Here in San Francisco, we'll see how that goes. But it's like how is it that we can use the legacy of trans resistance to police violence and for prison abolitionist and police abolitionist activism now. So the thought has occurred to me that this could be a great sequel to Screaming Queens. It was like 1966, trans women fought back against the police. What's going on there now? A prison? What? A for-profit incarceration facility? What? Like, how can we link that past to what needs to happen in the present? And so, I think that making a film about a campaign to drive Geo Group out of the 111 Taylor Street facility could be a really cool way to make media about trans history in a way that is not just a kind of antiquarian, sepia-toned, nostalgic look at the past, but is about mobilizing legacies of resistance in the present for change that still needs to happen. So fingers crossed that something could happen along those lines. I am in active discussion with people about that.